Hey, Paula, let's test your audio. How you doing?
Hey, Julie, I can hear you just fine. How are
Oh,
you
good.
doing?
I am hanging in there.
It's busy time.
Yes.
Thanks.
And Brad, how is your audio?
It is doing just fine.
Okay, let's try out allowing you to be. Oh my gosh. Give me just a second, Joel. Admit. Okay, Brad Smith. I don't want to make you host. I just want to let you screen share. I think you can anyway. So Brad, would you go ahead and test out screen sharing? Okay, good. Yeah, I don't have it locked on this. Yep, it does. So go ahead and stop screen sharing, but it works just fine on my end. We can see it.
Okay, now that may be a harder problem. Well, that's actually an interesting question. I wonder how I do it.
So you toggle back over to the Zoom area, and at the bottom or the top, there should be some view options, and you should be able to stop sharing.
Let me just kill that program. I will restart it, but I know that it works and we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah, we can do another test again too.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Thanks for being here, Brad.
Oh, very welcome.
All right, folks, we'll give another minute for people to join. Good to see you all already. Hey, Anita. How's everybody doing? Good, George. Good. And staying sane, staying healthy as best we can. Sorry, I'm just admitting some people from the waiting room, making sure everybody can attend who wants to. So thanks for your patience, everyone. We have a couple of board members who are unavoidably detained a little bit today, Peggy McGuire and Jan Napak and Barbara Hanley. So they'll be excused during roll call, but they will be joining today. Okay, it's 4:01, so I'll go ahead and get your meeting started to respect everybody's time. Welcome to your January Hope Advisory Board meeting. We have some new folks here, but we are going to respect our guest speaker, Brad Smith's time, and have him as the first speaker after some housekeeping, and then we will dive into introductions for all of the board members. So first, let's start with some housekeeping. I will go ahead and share my screen. And just to remind everybody, you are being recorded. You should be on mute and with your video off when you first join. And you can unmute yourself or share your video. We're going to be doing public comment right after I go over the agenda. So if you are interested in doing public comment, please type into the chat function. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a little bubble that says chat, and just type in your name, the general topic you'd like to comment. And there'll be an opportunity for that in about a minute here. Give me just 1 second, folks. Okay, so here is your meeting overview for today. The public comment can be up to 10 minutes, depending on who is interested in commenting. Then we will do roll call for you all and approve the November meeting minutes, which I sent out late last week for you to review. Then we have an educational guest speaker with Brad Smith here today. Brad, thank you for being here. And he can introduce himself when we get to his portion. And then introductions and recent updates from you all as Hope Board members, because there's some new folks here today. And then we will go over the co-chair duties and the benefits of being a co-chair and what the roles and responsibilities are, because it's time to elect some new co-chairs next month. I'll touch on the recruitment priorities for the board vacancies and the work that I've been doing on that. And then myself and Brigida Olson from the city. Thank you for being here today, Brigida. We're going to share an update on the implementation of your HOPE recommendations in the community because a lot is going on. And then with any time that you have remaining, there should be a good chunk. You can have a discussion about your next steps and the role you can play to support implementation of your recommendations based on a lot of the discussion you've had previously and the guidance in your bylaws. So just to remind you all and everybody who is chiming into here today of the agreements for the culture that this board wants to set in all of their meetings and interactions and community engagement, being sure to be inclusive and respectful and honest and kind and open-minded and curious and transparent. At the executive committee's request quite a while ago, reminding everyone of this culture, and you all have done a fantastic job of reinforcing it. Okay, I am going to go ahead and stop screen sharing for a second, pardon me, just to make sure that there is nobody who is interested in doing a public comment today. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Paula, can you confirm for me? Are you seeing anything? Okay, I don't see any. Yeah, thanks, Paula. Is there anybody who has called in on the phone? I don't see any phone participants, but I always want to be sure I haven't missed anything. Now would be your time to chime in. Okay, hearing none, there's no public comment at your January meeting. And I'll go ahead and screen share one more time to do roll call to approve your November meeting minutes. One edit was made. Thank you, Joel Goodwin, for catching the way that the core team, the crisis outreach response and engagement team, is responding to calls for mental health crisis situations. I just modified the way that that was described in the notes to make sure that it was accurate, but no other substantive changes were made. And I did not receive any grammatical ones either, but I went through and made sure. We need a motion from one of you to approve your minutes.
So moved, Carol.
Thank you, Carol. Is there a second?
Second, Joel.
Thanks, Joel. Okay, as I go through, please say aye or nay or abstain for the minutes and that you are present. Catherine Biscoe.
Approve and present.
Catherine, I'm not sure you were at the November meeting, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think you have to abstain.
I thought I was at November.
Okay,
I did miss
then you were.
October.
Then you were. I couldn't remember. I wanted to check in with you. Thank you. Carol Butcher.
Approved, and I'm here.
Thank you. Bruce Butler. Oh, and I don't know if Bruce can join us for the first hour. I apologize. Mark him excused. Brian Cotter. Brian, are you here with us today? Okay. Anita Earl. I saw you earlier, Anita, but I can't hear you. Are you trying to chime
I'm
in?
approved and I'm here.
Thank you. Joel Goodwin.
Here and approved.
Thanks. Barbara Hanley. Oh, and Barbara will be about 20 to 40 minutes late, depending on another engagement. Cindy Lolick.
I'm here, but I was not at the November meeting, so abstain.
Thank you for that. Hold on, I gotta move this out of the way. Charles Mon.
I'm here and I approve.
Peggy McGuire has an unavoidable conflict for the first part of the meeting, so she can be marked excused absent. Jim Moorfield.
Here and approved.
Thank you. Andrea Myrie.
Here and approved.
Jan Napak. Oh, and Jan also will not be here for the first 20 minutes, but she will be joining us. You'll have to tell me at the end if we have a tally that's more than 50%, Paula. Reese Dotzenberg.
I'm here and I approve.
Thank you. Nancy Wise.
I am here and I was not at the November meeting.
Abstain. Okay. Paula, do we have more than 8? Did we have 9 folks who voted for the minutes?
And Julie, just a head up, I'm here and I approve the meetings as well.
Did I skip you, George?
You did.
I am so sorry. I apologize. I think that's the first time that's happened. You know I love you. With George's vote, do we have 9, Paula? Okay, thank you. I'm seeing you give a thumbs up. Your meeting minutes pass. And I'll go back to here.
You really love George?
Yeah, I do. I've got some love in my heart for all y'all.
Well, be still my
Carol,
heart.
you know I'm special.
Oh, yeah, I knew that, but I didn't know she knew that.
Oh,
I love
are
you
the
too,
best.
Carol.
So to dive right into your educational component, and then we'll spend some time talking with each other. We have a guest speaker, Brad Smith, who's going to share data on a couple of different things. So I am going to stop sharing and turn the reins over to Brad. And thank you dearly for being here.
Well, you're very welcome, especially if we can successfully screen share. Do you see a H.O.P.E advisory board on the? is
No,
that-
you're not screen sharing right now.
Okay.
You did that first time though. That was successful.
No, this is doubles as an IQ test and I could be in trouble. How about that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for the chance to share some of the stuff we've been doing over the last few years on basically tracking some of the issues, some of the data. When Julie originally talked to me about this, I had the impression that I was going to be pressing my luck if I went for 15 minutes, and I had about 10 minutes to actually cram everything in. So I pared down quite a bit, which for me is actually probably a very good thing. It tends to sort of keep things maybe within timeframes. And she had two sort of topic areas she wanted me to talk about. One were some of the observations from the earlier pit counts, and then some comments on the current shelter operations. And
Hey, Brad, I'm so sorry. I'm going to interrupt you. We have people joining who might not be familiar with these acronyms that we use every day, like PIT, the point in time
oh,
count.
okay,
So as you go through, be sure to say what they are.
perfect. Be glad to.
Thank you.
So I'm going to share just a few comments from the point in time count, the pit count from 2020. They've been run for quite a few years. And for those of you that are not familiar with the pit counts, mandated by the federal government on a 2-year basis, the ones prior to 2018 that I've looked at for the most part were lousy data. 2018 I thought was at best marginal. The 2020 data set is pretty good. Different way of collecting the data, much better organization. And so I think we can look at the data from 2 years ago and have some confidence that that's probably real. The stuff prior to that, I think it's interesting. I think it's somewhat useful, but I think it should also be viewed very cautiously. First question, can people see the pointer when I'm moving this around?
I can see the pointer, Brad, but you're still in like your own slide mode with all of the tiny slides down at the bottom. And so it's not taking up the full screen for me.
Okay, how about that?
There we go. Much better. That makes the font a lot bigger.
All
And
right.
folks should be able to zoom a little bit on their own screens as well. But any zooming you can do so that we can see details would be helpful.
Okay, and I'm full screen here. One of the things, when we looked at the pit count from 2020, I had an opportunity, CSC was wonderful about releasing the data from the 3 counties. And so I was able to actually look at Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties as a group and start asking some of the questions of what was similar in each county and what was different. And as we start taking a look at the 2020 results, I think it's going to be interesting to see if some of these trends hold up. And I'm going to share just a couple of observations from the 2020 pit count. But the first one is there are a variety of methods, sheltered, non-sheltered, men, women, split out in the matrix. And the thing is that was interesting to me, when you take a look at it as a percentage of the population, 63% men in Lincoln County, 36 in Lincoln, similar percentages here. So in all 3 counties, the ratio of men to women was roughly 2 to 1, which is really in disagreement with what we're seeing in the shelters now more and more, and in disagreement with what we see nationally. And yet it was consistent across all 3 counties. And the question that I think is going to be interesting to look at in the 2020 numbers is if this was strictly just the result of sampling anomalies on how the information was collected, or if this is real, because it does have an impact on where we choose to put resources going forward in terms of do we need to expand capacity on the men's side, on the women's side, or both?
What do you mean, Brad, that the what we observe and what the pit counts? What's the difference?
Oh, yeah, maybe I can go back. Well, it's the observation that when the number of women and men were counted up, that we had roughly a 2-to-1 disparity between the number of men and women in these populations. And so the pit count is only as good as the collection process, how effectively the observers are getting out there and interacting with people who are being counted. Or in the case of Lincoln County, they also did a fair bit of just observational, where they didn't actually talk to the individuals. But across all 3 counties, basically men outnumbered women about 2-to-1, and fairly surprising. Carly, I don't know if I'm answering your.
No, you said you said that the pit count is at odds with what you are observing, and what I didn't understand is what you're observing, where the difference is.
What I'm observing is the count within the shelter system here in Corvallis. When we take a look at the male-female distribution at the shelters and at the daytime drop-in and at Unity Shelter on their other facilities, there the number of men and women are much closer to parity. And so it's not obvious to me why on the pit count we are seemingly reporting far more women or far more men than women, and yet on the services that are being provided locally, it's much closer to parity. So it's a question to be looked at going forward. Another question that I think has some interesting implications is when the total number of individuals in the various counties were added up. We have Lincoln County, there was 167, 140 in Benton, and I'm sorry, and the totals down here, all added up, and then made some estimates based on our assumptions, our working assumptions as to what percentage of the population we were actually counting. So in the case of, let's go to take a look at Benton County, I'm pretty comfortable that we had 100% of the shelter population, since we knew all of the shelters, and I think that was a full count. On the individuals interviewed out in the field, you know, the assumption is that you're missing anywhere from a half is a good starting point. At most, we might have had 2/3. And so based on those estimations, correcting for the people we couldn't see, it suggests that in Lincoln County, the number of homeless individuals was far higher by a long shot than what was seen in either Benton or Lynn County. The reason that I call this to your attention is when we take a look at the population of those 3 counties. So in the left column here, Lincoln County 2 years ago was about 50,000 people, 93 in Benton, 129 in Lynn. Those were the numbers from that point in time. When you start taking a look at the percentage of the population represented by our estimates of how many individuals were homeless, this is the number that is really interesting. And I think it has some interesting consequences for Benton County and for the whole region, that much higher apparent incidence of homelessness in Lincoln County than in Lynn or Benton County, which were very similar. Again, just observational, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next pit count. Last set of observations from the pit count from 2020 is looking at the racial composition of the populations. This is across all 3 counties. So 370 sheltered individuals and a total of 501 unsheltered individuals. The part I'd like to call your attention to whoops, what happened? We just had a meltdown. Is when you take a look at the percentage of the population, in the case of the sheltered individuals, about 5% were identifying as being Native American, and in the unsheltered population, around 9%, both of which are dramatically higher than the percentage of Native Americans in the general Oregon population. By comparison, this slide shows the last 5 years of individuals in the Benton facility. So this is the men's shelter, the women's shelter, and more recently, the 3rd Street Commons. And the thing that I want to call your attention to is the unusually high percentage of individuals self-identifying as being Native American. And this number down here on the women has actually been going up fairly dramatically in the last 6 to 12 months. And something on the order of 15% of the population that we see self-identifies as being Native American or partially Native American.
Hey, Brad, can I chime in and ask you to hit the use slideshow frame? Yeah, like
Gotcha.
there we go. Thank you. It makes it a little bigger for the
we go.
viewers. Much better. Thank you.
So this is going to be one of the observations that is going to be very interesting to see as the pit count gets put together. First of all, is this a real disparity? Because the Native American population in the state of Oregon is something under 1% of the population. And this number supports what we've known for a long time, that the Native American population is significantly overrepresented in the homeless population. The magnitude of it rather surprises me. Off on a much less pleasant note, this is tracking on some of the shelter individuals. These are the 37 deaths that we've tracked amongst the homeless population that we've worked with in the last 5 years. And the key, this is the age at death of these individuals. And the key point is that the average age of death in this population was 56 years old versus an average life expectancy in the state of Oregon for the overall state population of just under 79 years. It's one of those figures that we all know, but it was actually fairly both disturbing and supportive, I guess, of what we've known, to take a look at the population that we've been tracking on what the actual age was at death. Okay, so shelter operations. Let me tell you what I'm not going to be talking about. I do not have information that I'm sharing with regards to COI, with Jackson Street, or with CARDVA. This is solely information based on information that we've gathered at the daytime drop-in, at the hygiene center, the men's shelter, the women's shelter, 3rd Street Commons, Safe Camp or Safe Place, and Corvallis Housing First. And this is a look back over the past few years on what the capacity is of the shelters. So right now, men's shelters at 39 beds, room at the inn at 22, 3rd Street Common at 24. And note that you can have 1 or 2 individuals in a unit at 3rd Street Commons. So somewhere in the order of 85 to 95 individuals per night. In transitional housing at Safe Place, there's 24 shelters currently in operation, 1 or 2 people per unit. So a capacity of somewhere in the order of 24 to 30 individuals per night. And at Corvallis Housing First, at the moment, we have 39 rooms, 4 facilities, and 1 or 2 people per unit. So a total capacity of 39 to 44 per night. So the total capacity of this block of housing in Corvallis is somewhere in the 150 to 170 beds per night.
Hey, Brad, can I jump in just for a couple
You bet.
acronyms? CHF on that first
Corvallis
part.
Housing First. Yep. Sorry about
And
that.
No, that's okay. And US is not the United States, it's Unity Shelter, which oversees the men's shelter and the room at the end and is running operations at 3rd Street.
Thank you. And COI is community outreach. Yeah, I'm zipping along. I've been doing this too long, I'm afraid.
I'm right there with you, Brad. I have a post-it note to remind myself.
I want to share a little bit about what's happened with at the men's shelter on the differences or changes in occupation patterns. So this is looking at the seasonal occupancy, number of beds being used by clients over a period of 6 years here. So up through the end of the 2020 season, so actually just short of the usual closing time in mid-March, the men's shelter had been operating from the 1st of November through the end of March and has been doing so for about 15 years now. And as a side note, down on the bottom, you might note that in that 15-year period up through 4 or 5 days ago, 67,000 beds had been provided for shelter, which personally I think is pretty impressive. At the end of the normal 2020 season, COVID hit and things closed down. So I'm basically taking the last period of time, looking through the middle of March here, at which point the men's shelter closed down. And the decision was made that it was not going to be possible to keep adequate social distancing between individuals, and that for the health and welfare of the individuals, it was going to be a safer situation to have them not housed inside the shelter. Opened back up the 1st of November at a reduced capacity. And as you can see on up through today, a steady increase in the number of individuals using the facilities. And if you take a look at it, this is a little bit confusing as a graph, but I'll show you the same graph a couple of different times. What I'd like you just to notice is these black dots running across the top and then down here and coming up. Those are associated with the right-hand axis, and that's the number of beds that were available. And so one of the things to note is that when the men's shelter opened back up, low capacity, 18 beds, and then slowly increasing in capacity up to the current capacity of 39 beds. And not surprisingly, the number of individuals who made use of that has increased. And these blue bars, which are the percent occupancy, has followed roughly. And so the shelter is operating at about 75 to 80% capacity. And that's pretty typical for this time of year, probably a little bit lower than usual. In contrast, the women's shelter operated on a different model. And they decided that at this point in time, right out here in the middle of March 2020, they looked at it and said, you know, we think that a better choice is to try to keep the women inside the shelter, try to keep them socially distanced. They went to some very extreme measures on social distancing, and they were able to very successfully operate throughout the entire period. And so they have been in continuous operation since November 1 of 2019. And if you take a look at their bed numbers, they've only increased slightly, went from 15 to 18, currently at 22. And if you take a look at the occupancy, the big thing that you'll notice there is that they're operating at essentially full capacity most of the time. And where you see these nice little curves up here being topped off, that means that those are the times when the bed capacity was equal to the number of people they had. So they were at 100% capacity. Again, on the years since they've been operating, 22,000 bed nights, pretty impressive. Okay, this is the 3rd Street Commons, and this has been an interesting story. This is the old Budget Inn down in Southtown, Corvallis. And I'm going to jump ahead and show you the occupancy piece here. The Budget Inn opened as a shelter at the end of March 2021, excuse me. And you'll notice that the number of individuals, clients using the facility has slowly but steadily gone up. And the reason for this slow increase has been that there's an awful lot of repairs that had to be done to the facilities, basically bringing the facilities up to a usable standard. So a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance. And the shelter is now operating consistently at 85% capacity. So if you put it all together and you take a look at the combined number of individuals that are being housed between Corvallis Men's Shelter, the Room at the Inn, the 3rd Street Commons, Safe Place, and CHF, as of last night, there were 128 individuals that were being housed, and this is about 85% capacity. The thing that I would like to call your attention to, though, that I think is extremely important, is if you take a look at the supply of permanent supported housing during this period, it's been absolutely flat. There has been no net increase in permanent supported housing. CHF, if everything keeps coming together, will increase slightly with 4 more units next month. But this increase in number of individuals being housed on a temporary basis has been almost entirely due to the shelter and the transitional housing. So the shelters and the micro shelters, that has been where people have been housed. Entirely different topic. One of the questions Sean popped up with, and I think this is probably of interest to the public health people in particular, is he said, I'd sure like to know how successful we have been in terms of getting people to get vaccinated for COVID. And one of the questions he asked is, he said, can you track that? And I said, yeah, no problem. When people come into the shelter, you just ask the very simple question, have you been vaccinated for COVID-19? They're free to answer yes or no, or choose not to answer at all. They don't differentiate between which type of vaccine you got, how many vaccines you've had, whether you've had boosters. It's just, have you been vaccinated? It's a crude measure, but it's better than anything else. And the part that's actually pretty interesting to me, this is information from the past 30 days, so current as of 2 days ago. About 2/3 of the individuals going into the men's shelter have been vaccinated. And the folks at the Room at the Inn absolutely rock. They're incredible. I mean, they were almost 90% of the people that have been sheltering there are vaccinated. Whereas at the 3rd Street Commons, it's more like half. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But the part that I guess I find very encouraging about that is that ideally you'd like to have 100% of your populace vaccinated for COVID. But as a cohort, you compare it to the balance of the state of Oregon, that's a pretty good vaccination rate overall. And so kudos to the public health sector on getting this population vaccinated. COVID is certainly present, but we've not seen the widespread deaths that everybody was predicting from COVID. And I think the vaccination program has been very successful. So a good talk like this wouldn't be appropriate if you didn't have something that was politically controversial. So I've got to go stir things up a little bit. And one of the questions I get asked on a pretty regular basis is, are the services that are provided by Corvallis in all of its different manifestations, its different organizations, are they a magnet that cause people to be specifically coming to the area? And it's one of those questions that is extraordinarily difficult to prove no. And so there's a lot of things that it's a very ambiguous question, a difficult one to answer. And so what we did is we took a look at some of the data sets and said, do we have information that we can use to at least indirectly ask this question? And let me give you an example. Fred goes into the hygiene center and gets a meal today. The program records that Fred got a meal, and then also asks the question of, have we seen Fred at any time in the past 12 months? If the answer is yes, we're saying he is a returning client. We've seen him before in the last 12 months. If the answer is no, then we're saying he's a new client. Charlie came in yesterday. We've asked the same question, and Sean comes in tomorrow, and we ask the same question. So for each client on each day, we go back 12 months or 24 months or 6 months. We've asked the question all the different ways, and the answers are very much the same. And said, basically, is this a new person or is this a returning person? And we took a look at two populations. One, we said, okay, let's look at the shelter. And so we looked at the men's shelter and the women's shelter together for a 5-year period. And then we also took a look at the service providers. So we took the hygiene center and we took the daytime drop-in and pooled those. And I'm going to show you just one of the data sets, but it's pretty interesting. These are the service providers, and they really started getting onto the system and providing services on a regular basis somewhere in the summer of 2020, where we were able to track them on a reliable basis. And we're actually looking at a large number of individuals. So in the case of returning clients, well over 300 per month. And by just splitting them out into this is a new client or this is a returning client, you can see that we've had a general increase in the need and use of services. So the number of clients seen by the daytime drop-in and or by the hygiene center has continued to increase. But of this population, the vast majority are returning, whereas the number of new clients as a portion of this population has stayed relatively low or declining. So there's nothing in this block of information to suggest that there's a large influx of new people. The housing information, which I'm not going to show you, shows much the same thing. And so the final way I looked at this was I asked the question, one of the questions in the system is, where have you lived for the longest period of time in the past 12 months? And we've asked this question for a lot of years. And we basically split it into two time periods. The period from 1st of April up to present, which I'm calling the COVID era, and then the 5 years prior to that. And so just percentage of clients, okay, not surprisingly, Corvallis is the area where the highest number of clients have lived for the past 5 years. And if you take a look at the prior 5 years and then the post-COVID period, they're a little bit different, but not notably so. It's kind of about the same. If you take a look, don't do that to me. You take a look at Albany. If anything, during the COVID period, we have a little bit lower percentage of individuals who've been in Albany than in before. So, we consistently have, 10% of the population that lives in Albany and comes over. That's probably dropped down. In the Portland and surrounding areas, maybe a slight change. The take home out of this is that we actually haven't seen a dramatic shift based on either the use of services, the use of housing, self-reporting on where the individuals have lived for the longest period of time. There's nothing in the data sets that I've been able to pull out so far to suggest that there's a significant shift in people coming into Corvallis for the services.
Hey, Brad, I'm going to interject and say you have a couple minutes left if you want time for questions.
Good. And since I'm ready to do summary, I'm there. So in terms of shelter beds, we're consistently sitting at 85 to 95 shelter beds that are available per night. Overall, the shelters are operating at somewhere between 75 and 85% capacity, with the women's shelter consistently operating at capacity, at or near capacity. And I would make an argument that resources need to be directed to increasing on a long-term basis the capacity at the women's shelter. There has been no increase in permanent supported housing in the block of housing that we track. And the 3rd Street Commons conversion to permanent supported housing is 2 to 3 years off. So the increase in capacity that we've seen has been due to the shelters and safe place. Pleasant surprise, the vaccination status for COVID was between 50 and 80+%, with most of the facilities, 2/3 of the population, give or take, is a pretty good estimate. Part of the reason for the lower number of COVID vaccinations at the 3rd Street Commons is that it has also been used by the county as a site for putting some of their COVID positive individuals. So that sort of complicates it. And finally, there's no really solid evidence to suggest an influx of new individuals into the area. And with that note, I will leave you with a photo of the dynamic trio that were down inspecting the 3rd Street Commons a few months ago. And we very much want to thank all of them for their ongoing support of the operations. So questions, comments?
Brad, if you can go ahead and stop screen sharing, and then I'll be able to see everybody
There we
a
go.
bit easier. Thank you. Thank you so much for all that data. If you can email it to me, I will include it with what I post on the website after this meeting, and I can email it out to all the board members. Do we have any questions from our board members? If you could raise your hand or indicate somehow that you'd like to ask a question. George, go for it. Oh, and George, unmute yourself. I can't hear you. There you go.
Thanks. Brad, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming. I've missed talking to you. It's good to see. It's good to see what you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing. I don't know if you can answer this question, but I'm going to throw it to you anyhow. You know, when you think about a range of housing types that you need in a community for a healthy community, we've done a lot of studies to say, you know, we're really lacking in affordable housing. With shelters, we're dealing with kind of one of the most basic forms of housing that we can do. And so when I look across the range of types of housing that are needed between shelter and somebody living independently and paying for their own way, do you have, you know, based on this data, can you make any assessments about, you know, where the need may lie from a shelter capacity standpoint? It looks like we're pretty close to having kind of what we need to deal with what the situation is, but can you make any assumptions on other types of housing need that may be out there based on this?
I am probably not the appropriate person to really even speculate on that. I can speak to the shelter side, and I think you're correct in your observation that I think we're sized somewhat correctly, with the women's shelter being the caveat to that they are not adequate. In terms of what the ultimate size is of the permanent supported housing that needs to be increased, there's been a range of numbers suggested that, frankly, I don't think I'm the appropriate person to be throwing those out, because I don't really have I haven't run the numbers on that. So you'll notice I'm sort of ducking and bobbing on that one.
Yeah, well, another way to ask it is of the people that you see in shelter, you know, it seems like probably, in my experience with the shelter population as well, is just, it seems like permanent supported housing, or at least transitional supported housing, is really a critical need that we're seeing that kind of keeps people in shelter that are ready to move on. Absolutely.
And I would not disagree with that at all. The question being, what's the appropriate number? Is it 30
Right.
or is that 50 or is that 100 units? A lot of that gets down to what assumptions you make as to what that housing looks like and what support services they need to go with that. Because it's really obvious and very apparent that you absolutely have to have those support services in place if that's going to be a successful transition.
Thank you, Brad. The next question we have is from Jim.
First statement, and then I have a question for you, Brad. My statement is that there's few questions that drive me crazier than are we a magnet for homeless folks? Because the unspoken assumption behind the question is that somehow our service system here is special. And while I value our service system considerably, Corvallis is not unique. If anything, we're behind some communities in not having a year-round shelter in the past. And anytime I've looked at statewide data, not just, Benton County or the 3-county area, anytime I've looked at statewide data, the per capita rate of homelessness in Benton County is lower than in most places. And if we were attracting people, it would be higher. And then the other thing is that in my observation with data in the past too, is that for some reason that we're not going to get into today, homelessness on the coast is really high. Lincoln County is not unique. The per capita rates of homelessness in some of the other coastal counties is extremely high. And there's, we can speculate about a number of reasons for that, but that seems to be the case. And, some of their service systems are quite stressed. My question for you is that I know in the past I've heard you talk about the experience, primarily at the men's shelter, of health issues with the people who are being sheltered. And I remember you talking about data that I can't remember anymore, about the significant percentage of people being sheltered that have significant health problems. Can you at least say something about that anecdotally, or?
Yeah, definitely. Good question. Let me start by going back to your first part. One of the pieces that I think as an organization and as a group that we need to be really thinking about is that each of the issues of homelessness are not specific to a county, and we need to be looking at it at a minimum as a regional set of issues. And we see a surprising number of individuals over the years that drift through our records, coming from east to west, west back to the east, going back and forth, and some north-south. And so it's an issue that we need to be looking at, not in a vacuum. It's Benton County, but it's Benton, and it's Lynn County, and it's Lincoln County, and it needs to be looked at comprehensively. So back to your question on the major health and both physical and mental health issues, very high incidence. I can speak better to the men's side than to the women's side. And for about 3 years, an exercise that we did at the end of each season was to sit down and go through all the people that we had seen in the system during that year. This is entirely subjective, but to the extent that we had distinct information about the individuals, we just ranked them. And we just said, okay, who has major medical issues that we know about, who has significant mental health issues, who has addiction issues. And what we observed was that the mental health issues were at least 50% of the population, very significant. And probably 2/3 of the population had moderate to severe physical issues. So as a group of individuals, major mental health, physical health, with an overlay of addiction issues in a rapidly aging population is an extremely, it's a very bad and a very dangerous combination of circumstances, which I think is what's accounting for the relatively high or extremely high mortality rate at a young age that we're seeing in this population. The other observation I would make before Julie puts out the big crook and pulls me off the stage is that when you take a look at the age distribution of the population, it's an older population that doesn't have a right-hand side to the age curve because they simply die off young. But as we look at facilities, it does highlight the importance of making sure that we think very actively about access issues as we put together shelter operations, because there is a significant percentage of this population that has really very severe mobility issues.
Thank you, Brad. I am sorry, we are a little over time for you and Carol. We're going to have to do your question via email to make sure that you all get to the rest of your agenda. But I know that this data is much appreciated by everyone on the board. And thank you for taking the time to be here.
My question was actually just a quick answer.
Oh.
So Brad, just a quick answer. Once when you spoke, you said about 1/3 of the people in shelter were pretty much should be institutionalized. Another third were sort of in the margin, and the final third could go into transitional housing. Is that still your, and I don't want to spend any time on it, so, but is that generally what you're discovering?
I hope I wasn't quite that broad.
No, but just sort of ballparky, because Julie wants us to move on.
Well, the one parting comment I would like to offer as a partial answer to that is that in the shelters, we are seeing more and more individuals with very severe problems, many of which are well beyond the capacity of the shelters to reasonably be handling.
Okay.
So the shelters are not set up for individuals with complex long-term medical issues. I mean, it's not a hospice facility. It's not set up that way. And it's not set up with the intent of effectively dealing with people with major mental health issues. And unfortunately, that's a role that the shelters are by default being given because no one else is picking it up, but that they are ill-equipped to handle.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Round of applause for all of your data and your presenting and your time. And you are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. It is open to the public, but I'm going to move on with your agenda. And we're going to get into, hold on just a second, let me move this around. There's been some board member changes with you all. You have a new business community representative. Christina Jansilla served for the first 2 years of the Hope Board as the business community representative. And now it is going to be Cindy Lolick, who manages the North and South Co-op, and she can introduce herself in just a few minutes. We've had another role member shift. Commissioner Ojero is transitioning out and Nancy Wise is transitioning in, Commissioner Wise. And there are also a couple board members who have recently moved on, Janie, Alita, Flip, and Dharma Krishna. And you have 5 vacancies total. So there are 16 of you on the board now. So I'm giving a little overview here for folks who are joining tonight for the first time, who might not be familiar with all the board members. And we're going to spend the next 20 to 25 to 30 minutes, depending on how long each of you talk, to do a 1 to 2 minute introduction of yourself. So if you could keep it brief, but definitely share these 3 things: your name, the pronouns you use, like she, her, hers, they, them, theirs, he, him, his, the organization or the perspective that you bring to the board, and any update of news or changes that have occurred since the November meeting. I know quite a lot's been going on out there. So I will go ahead and stop sharing, and we will start with the first person. Catherine Bisco, are you back from your work phone call? And please do share your video so that everybody can see you. I know Catherine had to step away for a work call real quick, so if she's not back, then we will go on to the next person, and that's Carol.
My name is Carol Butcher. I am representing the Housing Committee of the League of Women Voters. I don't even like to deal with the whole pronoun thing, so we'll just pass on that one really quickly. The main thing that we're working on most recently since we last met is we're spending a lot of time on what's called the missing middle, the idea that you could have duplexes and triplexes in neighborhoods zoned for single families. The idea being that this will open up the housing for individuals who maybe could not get into a single family home. And then about to do, it's not a league official white paper because those are quite complicated, but a paper on the use of manufactured homes, and then trying to get the city's supportive of manufactured homes, but trying to work with neighborhoods to see that manufactured homes are a really good alternative to housing. And as we move into the missing middle and start to say that certain areas in our community could include duplexes and triplexes and townhouses, also looking at cottage clusters and looking at manufactured homes. So that's pretty much, we continue to monitor the work that's being done with the shelter. Both Lynn Jarvis and Sarah Engel are doing that, and testifying. But the primary focus we've been on is these 2 topics.
Thank you, Carol. That's great work and really needed. Next up, we have Bruce Butler, and then it'll be Brian if he is here. Bruce, hi.
Hello, I'm Bruce Butler. He, his, and I am the CEO of Samaritan Health Plan, which consists of a Medicare Advantage health plan, coverage for Samaritan employees, but the biggest part of our scope is the Intercommunity Health Network CCO. And I see that Melissa Isavorin is also with us, and she is our AVP that focuses exclusively on the operations of IHN. My interest at the very beginning with this group was very learning oriented because I wanted us, particularly with IHN, but Samaritan Health Plans in general, to be fully aware of the directions that the community would be headed with respect to homelessness issues, housing insecurity issues, and all the related ecosystem around that. And it's been very valuable for me. That was I certainly received that value, and looking forward to contributing any way that I can. Although I am going to be working with Melissa and Julie to think about how to scale up Melissa's involvement, because she's very, on a day-to-day basis, very tied in with IHN's operations and can provide a great bridge going forward.
Thanks, Bruce. Glad you're here. Catherine Biscoe, have you rejoined from your work call? Okay, Brian Cotter, are you here with us yet? Okay, then we'll go to Anita and then Joel.
I'm Anita Earl. I'm an LCSW, she, her, hers. I work for Samaritan Health, and I'm here representing Samaritan's homeless outreach efforts. And those efforts have been stepping up dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years. And I lead a sort of a task force, if you will, of social workers and nurses that respond to all of our homeless patients. And we work with our community-based partners who call us regarding anyone's healthcare needs. That means a nurse and a social worker will help try and navigate housing, food insecurity, medical management, durable medical equipment, pay for medication, pay for food if necessary, pay for supportive supplements, respond to take a look at injuries, vaccinate, test for COVID, you name it, and we kind of try and respond and do it. We also navigate the most complex patients within our system, and I manage the medical respite beds. We have medical respite beds in all 3 counties, and we partner with various wonderful community-based organizations like Corvallis Housing First. They let us buy beds and we put some of those folks, as Brad mentioned, that are showing up seeking shelter, who are extraordinarily ill. We're navigating hospice placements for people now, and we provide nursing and social work support till the end of life and pay for those beds in the community so we can support the unhoused who are extremely ill. And we have probably 20 plus beds in the Tri-County region for folks who are unsheltered. That's probably as brief as I can get with what we do. Nice to see everyone. Happy to be here as always.
Thank you, Anita. I often hear from our frontline homeless service providers that the best way to transition people out of homelessness would be to hire an army of Anitas to give them that wraparound whole person care. So thank you for what you do. Joel.
Hello, I'm Joel Goodwin. I'm a captain with the Corvallis Police Department. I've been here for about 23 years. I am responsible for the Professional Standards and Support Services Division, which means I'm the department's risk manager, 911 director, responsible for records and evidence training, our community livability unit, and a handful of other things that are on my list. And in law enforcement, our intersectionality with our homeless community members often is focused on those small percentage of folks that engage in behaviors that have a higher impact on the community, generating calls for service, including crisis, criminal behavior, things like that.
And just a reminder to share any update that's happened since the October-November time period. Joel, I think you might soon have the first quarter of data from the crisis outreach response and engagement sometime this spring. Do I have that right?
We are just over 6 months into that pilot project, and I believe that Chief Hurley is going to report on progress to City Council sometime next month.
Great, thank you for that update. Catherine, are you back with us? Okay, then George and then Barbara. I did not forget you this time, George. I'm sorry.
No, thanks. I'm George Grosh, and he, him. I saw this on the agenda and I felt like I was back in middle school and having to speak in front of a group. And that is probably hard for some people here to believe that I'd have trouble speaking in front of a group, but I think about what I've done and why I'm here and how I got here. And really it's just about who do I represent? I represent me, and who am I? I'm a retired senior citizen, aging boomer who cares about people in the world he lives in and wants to make a difference somewhere along the line, and has kind of lived a life trying to do that. And so I've had some experiences, and some of those things include being involved with casework and information referral in the county. I find it kind of ironic that we talk about having a hub of services, and Benton County had that at one time, and I was part of that. And it went away, and now we're rebuilding it, and that's a good thing because we're doing better now. So I've been involved with disenfranchised communities pretty much my whole life, and I volunteered. I got involved when I came to Corvallis. I found out Corvallis was a place that people volunteered, so I started volunteering, and I ended up serving on the city council and a bunch of commissions, and started some groups and did some things around housing, and now I'm here. And so I'm here because I care about people and I represent myself, and I like to work in groups of other people that care about people. That's what I found when you do these kind of things. So that's me.
Thank you, George. Love how heartfelt you are. Catherine is back, and then we'll go to Barbara. Catherine,
Okay.
go ahead and introduce yourself, the perspective you represent, and anything new since November-ish. And if you can keep it to 1 to 2 minutes, that'd be great.
I can. So hello, everybody. Lots of new faces. We're glad to have you here. My experience and how I came aboard with the Hope Advisory Board is at the time that this group was talked about is I was the program manager at Philomath Community Services for the Gleaner program, and had been volunteering with that program for 12 years and then served for 21 months as the actual manager itself, working not only with that agency, but with many partner agencies as well within Lynn and Benton County. I also have lived experience with homelessness after the recession. That is a space and a period of time where we saw a broad spectrum of services and what's available and what that looks like to be on the streets with a family and as a parent. So those two things really became a part of who we are as a family, but also as an individual. Through the service at Philomath Community Gleaners program, I interacted daily with folks that are in fact experiencing multiple layers of crisis, realizing that they're all very intersected and that homelessness is one step away for a lot of folks. And so it was a daily reminder that this is an important topic. Of course, we all know we've seen an increase in visibility in this. But part of my reason for looking to join this group was not only what can you do to support and what can you do to help by elevating the conversations, but also what's that rural piece look like. So Corvallis has some amazing resources. The Hope Advisory Board has put together some great recommendations for our county and city elected officials to look at, but also trying to keep in mind that there's a lot of folks that we don't see. The ones that aren't on the side of the road in a tent somewhere, or they're not living inside of some of our safe camp environments or our emergency services, but the ones that are living in someone's backyard or in somebody's chicken coop or in somebody's garage, or just couch surfing, because homelessness has a very different different look for different parts of our community. So part of my participation has been that rural representation as well. It's good work. I love that we've got a group that's very engaged, and we prepared ourselves strategically to be recipients of funding and support from legislative initiatives. That looks promising for us, but also that forward thinking, what does that short term and that long term look like for planning? So happy to be here, and again, happy to have some new faces at the table here, and looking forward to what's next.
And Catherine, you have recently become more involved with the League of Cities. Am I right? Do you want to share that as an update?
I can. So I was recently appointed to the League of Oregon Cities Board of Directors, and also serve on the new caucus. We have a women's caucus as well, and I'm the recently elected president to that group. I will tell you that that represents, the organization itself represents all 241 cities across the state. Legislatively, policy support, homelessness is a big conversation within that organization, and they're looking at resources and how we can maximize those resources, but also how we can get local elected officials and therefore their communities support in that space. So welcome to have that conversation with anybody that's ever interested. Hoping to bring more of League of Oregon Cities resources to this table as well as appropriate, and work with them as well, both legislatively and just policy wise, on how we can support these initiatives.
Thank you, Catherine. We have Barbara and then Cindy.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Hanley. My pronouns are she, hers. My perspective that I bring is as a community member at large who has also experienced the lived experience of homelessness. When I was 17 and in college, a landlord took my money, rid it out to somebody else, and I was stuck for about 3 months, couch surfing, sleeping in my car. So I have that perspective. I'm currently an environmental occupational epidemiologist working, hopefully we'll be done with my PhD in a couple of months. I work at OHSU as a research associate in the Institute of Occupational Health Sciences, where I'm a fatality investigator for that program. And a workplace fatality in its broadest sense is a policy failure. And I also see homelessness in that way. And I love what George said. And I feel what he said, it resonates with me, but I feel like homelessness is a policy failure. But the good thing about a failed policy is it can change. It takes people willing to step forward and make that happen. And one of the things I heard from a policy course I took at OSU is policy is made by the people who show up. So I'm here. I'm hoping that I can drive positive change to help those less fortunate.
Thank you, Barbara. We're also doing quite a bit to be more inclusive with how we, who shows up and who can show up, and making it easier for folks to get here from our communities of color. Cindy and then Charles.
Okay, I'm Cindy Lolick. I've been the general manager at First Alternative Food Co-op just over 11 years this month. Hard to believe. I was approached by the executive director of DCA, the ED of Visit Corvallis, and the ED of the Chamber of Commerce to be on this board.
And Cindy, the DCA is the Downtown
Corvallis Association, yes, and Visit Corvallis, and the chamber. And I was interested because I do have that experience of living with our business within a very short distance of the men's shelter and being able to navigate that with compassion, but also with practicality. We try to address behavior and not the individual when we're dealing with people at the co-op. And I feel, and I guess my colleagues in business felt that I would be a good representative because of that. And what I would really like to do someday is not to have a board like this. I think that is our ultimate goal, is to have everybody who wants a roof over their head to have that.
Thank you, Cindy. Welcome to the board
Thank
as
you.
one of our new members. Charles.
I'm Charles Mond. I am the Corvallis City Councilor for Ward 2, currently serving my 4th year on the City Council. I've been part of the Hope Advisory Board since the very beginning. And I agree with Cindy. I like that. The hope is to not have this board, right? To not need it. My day job, I am a compliance analyst for Oregon Housing and Community Services. So as you can see, housing's kind of my passion. So that's why I'm here. It's why I care about this issue a lot. It's really about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Anything new since November that you want to share?
I don't know. It's been a crazy couple of months. I can't stand the holidays.
Okay. Peggy, have you joined us yet? I didn't see you on the list of participants, but just in case. Okay. Jim.
Hi, my name is Jim Moorfield. I'm retired now after spending most of my career in housing and human services. I worked at Sunflower House in the 80s, the Community Services Consortium in the 90s. And for then my last 20 years, I was Executive Director of Willamette Neighborhood Housing Services. Recently, when I was updating my resume, I counted the number of housing development projects I worked on, and it was 29 over the course of the years, anywhere from a small of 4 units and a large of 80, 3-county area. And so that's what I love doing. I really liked hearing what Barbara had to say about policy failures and policy choices, because that's exactly where I'm coming from. I think the fact that we experience such high rates of houselessness is a public policy choice our society has made. And so I want to be on the Hope Board because, at least on the local level, I want to be able to influence those policies in both public and private sectors that impact how well or how well we don't house people. I should also mention that something new for me is that a couple months ago, I started doing some contract work with Corvallis Housing First and working towards the eventual conversion of their property on 3rd Street to permanent supportive housing. So there's 2 of us. I'm not an employee of Corvallis Housing First, but certainly I have a vested interest in their success. So I thought you should all know that.
Thank you, Jim. Jim has also been one of the 2 co-chairs for the past 2 years, Jim and Reese Stotzenberg. Andrea, and then Jan.
I'm Andrea Myrie. I go by she, her, hers. I'm the executive director of Corvallis Housing First, and we provide housing for people that have experienced homelessness. Right now we have 39 units of housing, and then we also have we work in partnership with Unity Shelter and providing non-congregate shelter here at the former Budget Inn site that we now call 3rd Street Commons, which we heard about today from Brad. So thanks very much for that. The only update I have, and that's interesting that Jim brought up his update, because along with that, we are moving forward with the process of starting to do interviews for development partners, our development consultants here at the 3rd Street Common Sites. We have Common Site. We have plans to build units of permanent supported housing here, and we're super excited about that. It's going to take a couple of years, but we're really looking forward to that. We've started working on a services coordination committee. Some of you will be hearing from me about that in the next couple of months. Just chugging along. So we're super excited, and I love the Hope, because this is a chance for our community to get together to make some really great things happen. So
Thank you, Andrea. Jan, and then Reese, and then Nancy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Janet Napak, and I've lived here in Corvallis since 1973. One of the I think I'm retired, but I kind of flunked retirement, and so I ended up on the city council. This is after 36 years of being either in the analytical or research departments of some of our larger employers here in Corvallis. I've been involved in, at least from a citizen's perspective, since about 2014, in being actively doing research and being opinionated, if you will, attending meetings and whatnot. I was just looking through some of my things, and I have a letter to the council dated September 2015, asking that we use evidence-based policy decision-making to reduce homelessness. And so on and so forth. It should be fully utilized to help in developing strategies for specific objectives. For example, if we wish to alleviate chronic homelessness, we will certainly need more transitional housing, not emergency shelters. That's the kind of thing I was thinking of back, 8 to 10 years ago. So I think I was selected, thanks to Biff. He put me on the steering committee with Zan and some other, I think Jim was there. We finally, pulled together the bylaws, and I really think we're on the right track here. And we're working together. We have a vision, we have a path, we have a wonderful facilitator. We have involvement with community, with this county, with the city governments, and the agencies. We're looking at a more focused approach, and I think that I think we're making progress. And I am an analytical person, and that's a double-edged sword. And so you're gonna sometimes you have to put up with me.
That's okay, Jan. I'm sorry, I'm going to chime in because Nancy has to jump off in just a few minutes. So Reese, I'm going to let Nancy go first, and then we'll come back to you.
Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Nancy Wise, Benton County Commissioner and the chair for this year. I really liked George's question, how did I get here? It made me think a little bit. I thought back to my childhood and my upbringing, where my parents forced me to volunteer and do community service from like age 5. And it was a great, rewarding experience. We served low-income organizations that serve low-income individuals and homeless. St. Vincent de Paul, St. Francis Dining Hall. I've also volunteered for CASA and other organizations that mentor at youth children or at-risk children. I moved here in 2001 to go to OSU. At least once, maybe twice during my tenure at Oregon State, I was this close to becoming homeless. There was definitely some challenging times. And I've had 4 loved ones that have also experienced homelessness. I have served on the Corvallis City Council for 2 terms before transitioning and getting elected to the Board of Commissioners. And as a city councilor, I supported the formation of this board, the Hope Board. And I'm not sure I have anything new since I was not on the board in November, other than I'm new with all of you, so that's good. And I was just also elected the chair for this term for the Board of Commissioners, so that's exciting.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, when Nancy said she was going to be the chair, that is for the Benton County Board of Commissioners. That is not for the Hope Board, just to make sure that nobody was confused. And Nancy, I'm glad to see you here. We'll go to Reese and then to Brian Cotter.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Reese Stopsenberg, he, him, and I've lived in Corvallis since 1987, and I'm raising 2 daughters here in town, 10-year-olds. let's see, I'm a small business owner. I own and operate Stopsenberg Wood Floors. But the reason I'm on the board and originally joined is because I have two close family members that have struggled with and experienced homelessness and struggled with drug addiction. And having witnessed this so personally has motivated me to see what I can do to help and learn more. And I really appreciate what everyone here is doing, and thank you all. And for new announcements, a couple months ago, my wife and I joined the team at helping manage Harriet's Housing, which I'll now be representing going forward on the board. Harriet's Housing has been around for 24 years and has served the community as a ministry started by Harriet Hughes in Philomath. The mission of Harriet's Housing is to provide affordable shared housing to homeless and low-income people. We also accept those on parole and non-predatory sex offenders. Harriet's Housing currently houses 90 tenants and 74 rooms and is working to provide permanent supportive housing to each tenant. Currently, there is 9 approved tenants on the waiting list. And recently, Harriet's Housing has gained nonprofit status, and we are excited to see where that takes us.
Congrats, Reese. I know that everybody's really thrilled to have Harriet's Housing become an organization and a nonprofit, and do some succession planning so that it stays affordable and supported. So good job. And Anita put something in the chat about Harriet providing shelter for many, many folks from Anita over the years. So yeah. Brian, are you at a point on your service call that you can introduce yourself? And thank you for joining while you're on shift.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Cotter. I'm a firefighter for Corvallis Fire. I've been here just over 6 years. I've lived in Corvallis for going on 12 years. I represent the local 2240, the union for the fire department here, as a member of this board, as in bringing the aspect of the medical side of dealing with the issues that we have. I know it's kind of loud right now. I'm on shift, so I'm trying to make the meeting. I'm sorry for being late. Currently, that's all I got off the top of my head. Everybody's having a good evening.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for joining us while you're on shift. I know everybody has busy lives and other full-time jobs, so we all appreciate you taking the time to be here. Was there anybody who has joined since we started doing introductions that didn't get to introduce themselves? I don't see anyone, but just double checking. Okay, I'll go ahead and screen share and we will keep
What
moving.
about you?
Me? Well, I'm not on the board.
Well, we still want to know who you are.
I'm Julie Arena. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am your Hope Advisory Board coordinator. And I work jointly for the city of Corvallis and Benton County on long-term policy and planning. And I have sort of 2 roles: support this advisory board in your role, and then do some facilitating and coordinating out there in the community to support your different recommendations, to make system change, to bring folks together, to connect where it makes sense, to deduplicate efforts. And I'm a real champion for making sure that we support our providers and community partners, because they are out there doing work 24/7, and we need to do the work to make the system change to help support them, because it's really hard to carve out time when you're trying to help someone immediately in front of you. So that's my role.
Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you, Carol. All right, we will go ahead and move on. Let me make sure. Okay, let's go ahead and screen share here. Give me just a second, folks. That is not what I wanted to do. I apologize. Let's make this bigger. We're going to be moving on to the co-chairs. So you all as a board will need to elect co-chairs at your next meeting. So I just wanted to touch on, what does it mean to be a co-chair for the Hope Advisory Board? We've had to modify some of this. The executive committee has had to modify some of this because we are living through a worldwide public health pandemic, and we've had to do fully virtual meetings run by a person like myself going to the next slides. And so the original intended role of the co-chairs has had to just adapt given what we're living through. But on the first column there, as far as the extra time and the responsibilities for co-chairs, you would have one extra meeting per month on the second Wednesday of the month from 4 to 5. There's usually an added half hour or hour if the executive committee is making decisions about new board members, but that happens only maybe once or twice a year. Usually it's 4 to 5 once a month. You set the agendas and the scheduling of educational components. You appoint new advisory board members. Right now there's 5 vacancies. So at the February meeting, there's going to be an extra hour to look at everybody who's applied, look at the representation that we have currently on the board and where there might be some gaps that need to be filled. Reviewing the bylaws to make sure that this board's work aligns with those bylaws that the city and the county chartered to direct your work. And then establishing any committees or work groups based on the direction and the bylaws and where you are in that work. Another role that the co-chairs can play, and if we were meeting in person, it would make a lot more sense for them to play, is to help run the Hope Advisory Board meetings, running breakout groups, running the different slides, running the flow of conversation, and really doing so in a way that aligns with those bullet point values of being data-driven, taking a systems level approach, involving the whole community, prioritizing vulnerable populations and community safety for all, and racial and ethnic justice. So if this sounds like something you'd like to do, think about that. And I think I'm gonna stop sharing. Yeah, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and pass it over to Reese and Jim. And each of them can take a minute or two to talk about what it has meant for them to be co-chair. Go ahead, Jim, I see you unmuted yourself if you'd like to go first.
Well, I just want to say a couple words of the reading between the lines of all those bullet points. Doing things like setting agendas is an important role of the executive committee, but really think about what that means. That means that the executive committee provides leadership into deciding what we're going to talk about, what we're going to do, and how we're going to organize ourselves. And so it's an opportunity to really think more deeply about what the Hope Board does, which is, I think, very just fascinating and interesting all by itself. And it's an opportunity to have significant influence over what the Hope Board does. Certainly all those big decisions that we make about what we're going to do next, we talk about as a full board. But there's a lot of nuance to that that has to get teased out and discussed in more detail at the executive committee meeting. So anyone that has a real interest in public policy and influencing the direction of the board, I really encourage you to consider stepping up as co-chair.
Thank you, Jim. And just so we're clear, before I pass it over to you, Reese, Jim and Reese have served as co-chairs for the past 2 years, and they are now stepping down to make room for 2 new co-chairs to join the executive committee. And you can serve for up to a 2-year term as a co-chair. So Reese, go for it.
Jim articulated that very well. That's basically what I was going to say. But there's a few things I could add. That you can have a significant impact on the community working, on the Hope Board, but especially on the executive committee. And I felt like I was actually involved in real things that were actually having a real difference. I appreciated that on the executive committee it was a little more casual and conversational. And of course, I was always impressed with how professional and dedicated the other board members were. They always included my insights and opinions, no matter how crazy they were. And I just really felt it's a great way to give your input and engage with those who are actively involved in housing people in our community. So I think it's somebody should step up and they'll get rewarded from seeing the changes.
Thank you, Reese. Are there any questions from the rest of our board members about what it means to be co-chair, or the commitment or the responsibility or the role? You can also follow up with me, and we will likely have some new board members next month who might be interested as well. Brian, did you unmute yourself? Did you have any questions? No? Okay. All right, folks, let's keep chugging along. And Jim and Reese, thank you so much for your insights. For board recruitment, the executive committee was looking, who's on the board right now, because the bylaws really dictate representation from different communities and different sectors. And so they asked me to reach out to all of you and ask any race or ethnic information you wanted to share, and any history of experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, because the bylaws say that representation on the HOPE board from our different communities of color and from people who have experienced homelessness and housing insecurity is something that the city and the county want on this board. And so a little bit of feedback. The board is mostly white and Caucasian, but there are 3 folks who are mixed race Caucasian mixed with something else. And so I went ahead and put them there. You have 2 business owners, 2 folks who have experienced homelessness, at least that was shared with me. 3 who have experienced housing insecurity and poverty, and 3 with close family members experiencing homelessness. There is some overlap with a couple of these folks. In looking at this, the executive committee had me prioritize recruitment from communities of color, in particular our Black community, Native American, and Hispanic communities. So I've been doing targeted direct outreach. I'm happy to say that we do have some folks from these communities of color who have already submitted applications. I'm going to be meeting with some to answer any questions. Business owners, so I've reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Corvallis Association, Visit Corvallis, and Cape Portia, who does economic development, to do recruitment for more business owners, and of course people who have experienced homelessness, and you do have 1 application from someone who has. So I'm really glad to see that from recruitment. Okay, so Brigida, how is your audio? Let me see if I can see you.
Good.
You there? You're good? Okay,
am
good.
here.
Just checking in with you. I know people tune in and out, especially if you're not at home. Okay. So Brigida and I are going to do an overview to give you an update on implementation of your HOPE recommendations. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Brigida, and hopefully, okay,
Great.
go for it.
First of all, thank you for your service. I've been spent almost 2 decades thinking about home, and appreciate everybody here and learning more about why you're volunteering your time to care about the most vulnerable in our community. So thank you. We have been working collectively with both the county, the city, CSC, and provider network, having regular meetings, talking about what's needed in our community associated with the number 6 sheltering goal, and what we can do as far as clarify our roles within the existing shelter system and work jointly. The city and county have issued an RFP for 4 micro shelters, one both at City Hall and at the fairgrounds, and that was just recently released. CSC is adding their staff capacity to improve data quality and support to providers for training and data reporting. We're finding that not all data is as precise as we saw from Brad. And so we have lots of different reporting mechanisms, and being able to better understand the needs is super critical, and appreciate CSC's support in that. Entities along with the city and county we're continuing to talk about site selections, potential locations for placement of emergency shelters, and doing our due diligence on that end. There was a request for proposal that was both for emergency shelter and or permanent supportive housing that was issued. The entity that was able to remaining entity was Corvallis Housing First. And so they were recently awarded $625,000 for permanent supportive housing, but working with Unity Shelter to see if they can also need assistance identifying a shelter for women There is additional capital at the state right now that the city may potentially be able to apply for if a location is identified, and that could be up to $750,000 of community development block grants. So, and then we're also working on implementing coordinated entry. So working on national best practices where folks get entered into a system so that we're helping identify who's unhoused and how to help prioritize their needs and get them into shelter, permanent supportive housing, etc. PSH, permanent supportive housing, I just talked about Corvallis Housing First. Is in, as Andrea just spoke, is working on the development of additional units of permanent supportive housing in Southtown on 3rd Street, and the city and county have provided some funds for pre-development work in that regard. They have money to help build it, and we'll be working with a developer partner and securing additional capital to help move that forward in the years to come. And as I just spoke, will be closing on a property for 4 additional units of permanent supportive housing in the next month or so. Next.
Awesome. Thank you, Brigida. Oh, do you have one more? You have many.
I have a couple more.
I apologize. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. So for the first time in my career, we're seeing historic levels of funding at the state and level. And so over $400 million is available for the development of affordable housing. And we are working, my division is working with affordable housing developers. So there's going to be a construction of 100 units of affordable rentals that will begin to be under construction this spring through Commonwealth. And the site was rezoned to high density residential. So really working and trying to be thoughtful about ways that we can have more density and bring in additional developers to help develop affordable housing. And we're currently working with multiple affordable housing developers. Right now, there's a potential of roughly 250 units of new affordable rentals, not including the permanent supportive housing that Andrea is working on in South Corvallis on 3rd Street. So a lot is in the works to try to help entities secure the additional dollars at the state level and help make sure that folks have a safe and stable place to call home. And then finally, talking about the historic levels of funding, the city of Corvallis has historically received roughly 500,000 of community development block grant funding on an annual basis. Some of that we keep for down payment assistance, housing rehab administration. The others we allocate for rehabilitation or capital. So we have roughly 300,000 of capital that we're going to be able to award out for 22-23 cycle, and then 80,000 for human services. And the applications just arrived on Friday, so still working through those. We received $1 million of home dollars. That's through HUD, so it's federal dollars through the American Rescue Plan Act, and that will be meeting with community partners now that can be used for affordable housing and or supports necessary to help providers with sheltering and or permanent supportive housing, along with another $1 million of funding from the legislature that just happened, I think, golly, probably a month or 2 ago. So we're still working on, I haven't seen the contract. I don't know all the nuances of that, but additional $1 million that the city will be able to help deploy in our community, along with 1.9 million of city resources from the ARPA funding. We'll be also reviewing our social service program policies this spring, and that's $360,000 on an annual basis. And then county resources of 500,000 for HOPE implementation. So
yeah,
there's,
we know, sorry, Brigida.
Go ahead.
We know that we have that 500,000 for HOPE implementation, and likely other funds coming from Benton County's allocation from ARPA, but that hasn't been finalized yet. I think the last draft was roughly 2.6 million, but they are also going to be looking at community feedback, so that number is subject to change. So I didn't want to include it here in writing for folks looking at it a month down the line, and then it might change.
And so with that, just there's a lot of resources and really working on making sure we can deploy it in a thoughtful way, so that it can have lasting impact and helping get more bricks and mortar and permanent supports out there.
Thank you, Brigida. I'm going to share a few slides, and Brigida, if you can stay on just until I'm done with my slides, and then if folks have questions for us,
Certainly.
just in case I cover something people have questions about. Back this past fall, when I met with each of you one-on-one, one of the areas of feedback and the areas of improvement that came from quite a few of you was that we just need more staffing to work on this, because what is articulated in the bylaws for the HOPE board to do really goes beyond a volunteer board that meets once a week. It needs a team of paid staff. And you as a board had said that a project manager, a communications person, and a financing grants person to work on multiple different projects that align with the HOPE recommendations was what you saw the need was. And myself and Brigida and our city, county, and provider partners and CSC, we spent a lot of time this fall at those weekly meetings talking about what staff capacity is needed to support our providers, adding capacity, and to implement the HOPE recommendations. So I am thrilled to publicly announce that we have hired a communications coordinator with Benton County Health Department. Her name is Kaylee Olson, and we've been looping her in to get her up to speed on all of this content. She starts February 1st. And half of her full time as a paid employee is going to be dedicated to this HOPE work. So the other half will go to other, communication needs for our health department, but half of it will be working on this to do all of that about communicating with community partners, with neighborhoods, with the general community, with city, with providers and partners, so that all that this great work is documented and communicated in a way that everybody can understand and know about. We have been included in a legislative pilot at the Oregon State Legislature with 8 city and county areas. So the city of Corvallis and Benton County is one of those 8 areas that is being included in a bill at the state to allocate $1 million to each of the 8 different pilot areas over the course of 2 years. So it's $500,000 a year for 2 years to support staffing for these city county areas, to do coordination, to do outreach, to do technical assistance, and really to establish a coordinated homeless response office. So there's different areas in the Portland metro area and really all over the state, but we're one of 8. So I'm really proud of the work that our city and county folks did. We worked in conjunction with League of Cities and Association of Counties to be included on this, and it has bipartisan support. So it likely will pass. It's not a done deal yet, but it will be a bill in this short session. And then county staff positions are moving forward. I just got the go ahead to share this. The position descriptions have been finalized, and probably within the next week to 10 days, these recruitments will be posted. So it is right on the horizon, and they will be working on the HOPE recommendations. There'll be 2-year limited duration positions of a project manager and a grants researcher and writer to work on all of the projects involved in your HOPE recommendations, on how to finance them, to work with myself on how to facilitate them with our community partners, and then to work with Kaylee Olson on how to communicate about it. So we are going to really have a dedicated full-time paid team to do some of this work. Very happy to share that. So I will go ahead and stop sharing and see if there's any questions on that update for me and Brigida. Barbara.
Yeah, thanks, Julie and Brigida, for that update. As you were sharing, I was thinking, this is why HOPE is important. All the work that has been done for the last 2 years, we had the data to make these recommendations, and then the money is now available, and things are going to fall into place, at least in terms of getting the infrastructure so that as for our implementation recommendations, we've talked about in the past how the community has sometimes said, why aren't you doing anything? And the piece that we need to communicate to our community is we could do things very piecemeal, or we can do it right. And to do it right, we have to have this infrastructure in place. We have to have project coordinators and communication coordinators and grant writers and researchers. That's how we get to that point that I think Cindy, you recommended, or I'm sorry, if whoever recommended it, was that we don't need a board like this because we have that infrastructure in place already. We don't need, to keep addressing this issue. So mainly kudos to you, Julie, for your ability to connect people. And then also to my fellow board members and all the great work that has been done so that when this opportunity, this windfall of financing became available, we were ready.
Thanks, Barbara. Definitely a team effort on the topic of homelessness and housing. Lots and lots of organizations and different people involved. George.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to add to that because I agree with 100% what Barbara just said. We should be thankful to the elected leadership and all of the people on the ground that have been doing work in these communities for years. Because this is, things just came together. This community was not prepared. We weren't prepared for anything like COVID. You can't prepare for something like that. But in a time of COVID, to get this done and pull this off, I remember 2 years ago that one of the things that was frustrating to people was that, how are we going to pay for all this? When we start talking about things, we start talking about money. Money is always the first thing that comes up. Oh, we can't pay for that. But the fact of the matter is we knew then, and we had ideas then that said, it looks like there's money coming. We might be at the right time. So this is an example of what the power of community can do. When people come together with a good idea, with right ideas and willing to share and exchange information and want to build something together, this is what it looks like. It looks like this.
Thank you, George and Barbara. Any other questions for Brigida or myself about our update? I want to let Brigida go as soon as she can so she can go home to her family.
Brigida will send the slides to us.
Oh, yes, I have all the slides that are included that Brigida went over. Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem. Okay, folks. Well, Brigida, thank you for being here. I anticipated questions I was not going to be able to answer, so thanks for staying late. Okay, we will go ahead and dive back into the rest of your meeting. To talk for the last bit here about what role the Hope Board can play in supporting implementation of your recommendations. The executive committee looked at all of the dialogue you had at your October meeting and November meeting, and the feedback that you gave at your one-on-ones, and where the city and the county and CSE and provider partners are in the implementation process. And these two general areas have really risen to the top, but this is for you to discuss tonight as a board. And I know you're only having about 15 minutes, so this will also be part of the February meeting. But the first one would be an evaluation and communication role, which really aligns with the bylaws. So interpreting the gaps that we still have in the system, and in the vein of Hope's role, and then communicating the progress that we have made to fill those gaps and what the remaining gaps are. So that system evaluation and that communication role sort of go hand in hand of what are the gaps remaining, how do we communicate them out, how do we work with our city and county staff on this as well. The second one, researching best practices on successful systems that correspond to your 12 recommendations and are relevant to the implementation being done by city, county, and provider partners. Right now, city and county are really prioritizing emergency shelter, the staffing for it, and the data to inform the shelter. And so researching best practices that align with your recommendations on those topics. But this really is up to you as long as it aligns with the bylaws. So give me just a second here and I will stop sharing so that you can discuss how to proceed on this, whether you need a work group or if you want to continue talking about this as a full board at your meetings. So anybody, sorry, go ahead, Carol.
Well, In terms of the first one, which doesn't interest me too much, I mean, I think the topic is really interesting, but you just mentioned a couple of the new hires. So I didn't know if you thought the person who's going to be part-time working with the Hope Board would be able to spend a little more time on the communication. I mean, we, the board could frame what we thought needed to be communicated and how, but the actual putting it together and going out might be somebody else. Whereas the second part, I think, is pretty critical to be able to show the community what's been going on and how we measure up to some of these other places that are doing things.
Thanks, Carol. Let me make sure I understood you correctly. Now that we'll be getting some staff capacity for communications, the actual coming up with the communications would be staff work, but assessing what needs to be communicated. What does our community want to hear and learn about as far as what's going on with Hope? Am I hearing you right?
That would be correct. We've all had experiences where people have said, we don't know what the board is doing. So clearly there's been a lot of information, but it's not coming in a form that's resonating with people. So I think we could work on that.
Okay, thank you. I saw Charles and then Catherine and then George.
Yeah, I think both of those are necessary. Number one, obviously, like you said, it aligns with our bylaws. It's a reflection of the work we've already been doing. And I think it's critical because the needs could change. You know, we might see like some of the data that's already presented showing the number of people, you know, based on who they are and what shelters are in and how many are unsheltered. And so I think we need to continue to monitor that and report our findings so we can monitor for what gaps there are. And then on number two, I think putting together a task force to work on that's a great idea. You know, we're not the first community or only community dealing with this issue. This is a worldwide issue, and I'm sure others have already found great solutions that have proven to work. And I think it's important to look at those as well.
Thank you. Catherine.
So I'm going to ditto to Charles's points and also to Carol's. There's a lot of work ahead of us, and keeping in mind, you know, what are those next steps will be important, and capturing other people's examples that we can bring back and not reinvent the wheel. But I'm also going to bring back to the table that conversation about rural Benton County. So Corvallis and Benton County centers, of course, around Corvallis, we've got 55 to 60,000 some odd people, give or take. There's 90,000 plus people in Benton County, which means we're excluding, not by choice necessarily, not by intent, but we're not really having this conversation outside of the Corvallis area. And as we move forward and implement with some substantial funding and some planning, I think it's important that we embed that rural aspect or that rural arm of all things that we do. I would just ask a perspective question, for example, does the folks in LC, do they have the access to the resources that we're developing in Corvallis? Do they know that they even exist? Are we addressing housing needs in Monroe or Kings Valley or Blodgett, Adair Village, for example, any of those areas? To be realistic and practical, anyone that's living with homelessness or on the edge of homelessness isn't going to necessarily be able to access those resources in Corvallis. So how do we embed that conversation about how do we expand those services, or that even if we're not at the point where we can quite expand those services, we are building in the conversation to make sure that we do in fact extend those resources where we can.
So communication about what's available and sort of communication efforts, and then also research of best practices that are aligned with your recommendations, best practices in rural communities, that kind of research. Okay.
I think the communications is a good point. I also think programmatically making sure that we look at rural connectivity to the resources that we develop and fund here as part of that as well.
George, I think you were after Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add one thing because I agree with what's been said, and the two pieces that you brought up I think are pretty comprehensive and could use a group to do it. I think I'm not sure that it's probably in there, but I'm not sure that I understand how it would be. The piece that I'm seeing is missing is one of the things that this group can do is to make sure that the issues around poverty and around homelessness and disenfranchisement of people remain an issue that's on the agenda in the community, in the city, in the county, across Benton County. Because what we're talking about is how do we build prosperous communities, and so we should be part of that discussion, and we should make sure that it maintains part of the discussion, because the political entities that sponsor this group spend a lot of time talking about economic development and what economic development looks like, but that doesn't always come to the people that we talk about. So having people, a group like this, that can be there to say, we're talking about prosperity. What does a prosperous community look like? And to me, that looks like a community where people can thrive. And so having an accountability role and keeping the issue forward in communications is I think, really important.
Thanks, George. Did I remember this right, that it's Barbara, then Carol, then Jim? I think so. Barbara, go ahead.
Thank you. When you mentioned the state pilot, I think one of the things that HOPE can do, going back to data management and data acquisition, I remember in our first meeting that I attended at the church, hearing Peggy talk about the 40 different systems that they have to enter into data, and that, you know, one of their staff is spending pretty much their full time entering the same packet of data into all these different systems. So I think one of the things that HOPE can do in conjunction with these other 8 municipalities that are participating is highlighting why we have to enter in data into 40 different systems, and push that back again as it's a policy that needs to be fixed. And if we can free up one of Peggy's staffers to, you know, do that one-on-one work with the community, then that would be beneficial. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. Carol.
Just a quick question. I don't remember when we were looking at who we're recruiting from, if we have a conscious effort to recruit county people, rural people, because Catherine's brought this up several times, and I don't know that we have a rural voice besides Catherine on the, well, I shouldn't say that because I don't know the other, but is that part of the, when the exec committee was looking at who we're trying to recruit, did they include specifically people from the rural community? Because if not, I think we should visit that and make that part of what we go after.
I don't want to speak on behalf of the executive committee. Are there folks on the exec committee who wanna respond to Carol?
Somebody answer me.
Well, we have some applicants, thankfully. We have some applicants, thankfully, from different areas, like Monroe. And
okay, I just want to make sure that I've been hearing Catherine say this, and I'm pretty tuned in that we're missing a segment of our community, and one way to get them in is to have them on the board, in addition to any outreach we do.
thank you for that feedback. And I can note that for the executive committee when they're looking at their recruitment priorities. Jim.
So we're going to be talking about this again next month. So I just want to make a comment that's just sort of food for thought. I'm interested in best practices, and when I think about our recommendations and where the priorities are now for action, I'm thinking especially about shelter and related services. It doesn't interest me that much to know what the best practice on running a shelter is. And in fact, I think that's more the responsibility of the service organization. What I am interested in is how do shelter services, this is just an example, how do shelter services intersect with an intake process? How do they intersect with helping people transition to more increasing housing security? How does it intersect with helping people gain permanent supportive housing? So we're talking about how the whole service system works as a coordinated unit. And to me, that's what the best practice ought to be that this board looks at, not how specific service components work, because that's usually the service providers who have to take the lead on that, but how the system works. And the system includes how things are funded. I've been really, really appreciative of the degree to which the city and the county have stepped up and put real human resources and financial resources into helping make things happen. And that leadership is very much appreciated. It's also just, one very essential, but one component of how a system works. I know that there are healthcare providers and insurers in the room here are really committed to the connections between health and housing, and that's why they're here. And that's another component of how the system works. So I'm most interested in looking at that big picture and how our priorities fit into a coordinated, effective, successful system of helping people end homelessness. And I think there's some public policy decisions to make that will really implement that vision. But I do think it's time for us to step back and kind of articulate that vision a little bit more than we have so far.
Thanks, Jim. So I wasn't hearing any sort of objections to those two main areas. If anything, it was more fleshing them out and a lot of support and better articulation than just 2 bullet points on a slide coming from all of you. Are there any HOPE members who have not talked yet tonight who would like to chime in on this topic of next steps for the HOPE board? And I think this will be one of your main agenda items at your next meeting. So hearing none and knowing that we only have a few minutes left, the executive committee can chew on this. And there are a couple of next steps I want to share with you just so everybody knows what's going on for next month. I'm helping to support recruitment of new members right now. The executive committee will meet in a couple of weeks to make new member decisions. So you will hopefully have a couple or a handful of new members joining you at your February meeting. And I will brief them on what it means to be a co-chair. I will probably play for them the 30-minute time period in this meeting where you all introduced yourselves to catch them up to speed and then have them do the same thing. You can elect co-chairs. Hopefully there's some interest. If any of you are interested and have other questions, reach out to me. And at your February meeting, we'll be reviewing and refreshing all of your memory on the equity lens that our consultant Jade put together for the HOPE board, Dr. Aguilar, and how to incorporate that into decision-making going forward. And there will also be a person coming from CSC to talk about the point in time count of our unhoused population. So that is next month. I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Any other questions from you all? How are you feeling at this juncture about where you are at this fork in the road with recommendations behind you and going forward? Cindy, can I put you on the spot and say, how was your first meeting and how you're feeling about this?
It went by very quickly. There's a lot of great and interesting information. I think I have a lot to absorb, a lot to learn before I could really jump into things with both feet.
That's how I feel about life, parenthood included.
I hear you.
Charles, go for it.
I'm feeling very optimistic. I've been, watching how people talk in the community, and I think people's perspective on this issue has changed drastically over the last couple of years, and I'd like to think it has to do with the work this board has done. We've provided data and really put the issue in a spotlight for both the city and county, and just for the community as a whole. I think we're addressing the issues and making things better.
Thanks, Charles. Well, on that note, I'll adjourn your meeting for you and we will see you in February. And thank you all for being here. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
Melissa.
Yeah, good night.
Paula, how are you doing? Do you need me to leave the meeting open any longer or are you good?
Oh, I'm good. Yep,
Okay.
I got everything out of the chat too.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You have a good night.
Thanks, Julie. Good
Bye.
night. Bye.